Hello, comic creators. My name is Gamal Hennessy, and this is the comic industry commentary for May 27th, 2022. We're heading into Memorial Day weekend, talking about freelancer contracts, freelancer pay, and the struggles of the international comic book market. The first story comes from me, because earlier this week, I posted a video specifically about the nature of work for hire agreements. We've had a lot of discussion and talk about the challenges and struggles that freelance creators go through in terms of their contracts with various types of publishers, especially the larger publishers. But there hasn't been, at least from what I've seen, there hasn't been a lot of discussion about the actual nature of work for hire agreements and what goes into work for hire agreements. So what I did in that video, I talked about the legal rationale around work for hire and copyright. I talked about the economic impact of freelancer contracts, both on the publisher and on the freelance creator. And then I talked about what actually goes into a freelance contract. So if you are a freelancer and you want to know what it is that you are supposed to be looking for in that contract, or you're a publisher and you want to know what you're supposed to put in that contract, that video will help you out. Although, of course, that is not legal advice because it's just a YouTube video. The other YouTube video that I wanted to bring to your attention comes from Comics by Perch. And in that video that I will link down in the show notes, along with everything else that I'm talking about today, he talked about the ability or inability for comic book writers to actually survive on the money they make writing just for comics. And he came to the conclusion that it is very challenging for most writers, no matter what book you're writing for and no matter what company you're working for, to actually sustain a viable career from a financial standpoint. And he is not inaccurate based on what I have seen, but I would go even further, because if you look at the average salary for any creative writer writing for anything, whether that's plays, TV, film, movies, maybe not video games, maybe those guys are making a lot, but everybody else is also making below the median average salary for the United States. So if you look at salary.com, they'll tell you that creative writers are only making $52,000, $53,000 a year, which isn't really enough to live on the way costs are going in the United States, especially because costs are going up everywhere you turn. So again, it's not a comic book problem, but it is not just a comic book problem. It is a problem for writers all over the creative industries, and I believe it has been for decades, because the trope and the stereotype of the struggling writer came from somewhere, and it came from the fact that none of us are actually making a lot of money. Switching over to the international side, there was a story that came out from Comics Beat earlier today about the struggles that Reed Pop and other comic book con promoters and owners are actually having with international cons, because it seems like there have been, especially in the case of Reed Pop, which the article goes into in depth, there seemed to be a variety of factors that led to the contraction and the shrinking of their overall Comic-Con empire. And of course, you have the obvious reasons like the pandemic, but you also have things like friction in business culture and the inability to translate certain business models and certain infrastructures beyond the core territories of the US and the UK, where Reed Pop is very strong. And I think if you actually look at that article, it is easy to come to the conclusion that just because comic culture is fairly strong throughout the world, that doesn't mean it always is going to translate into increased sales or increased attendance if you can't actually deal with the business realities and the overall realities of what's going on in the market. Now, taking that down a step, there was an announcement also earlier this week that Global Comics, the digital comic book platform, and AWA Studios, the emerging comic book publisher that came out about 3 years ago, are coming together to form a new partnership to get more translated comic book editions out into the market. So they're going to be announcing something, I believe, at the Tribeca Film Festival, where once you actually acquire one comic, let's say you acquire it in English, you will be able to then read that comic in Spanish, French, Italian, Hindi, and some other language that I don't remember. And I think this is a double-edged sword because it is actually helpful for any comic book publisher to be able to expand their market. And you can expand your market by expanding your territory and getting your book into other countries if you can get it in there in the language that's predominantly spoken in that country. However, just because your comic is available in another language does not necessarily mean that people in that country will read it unless your marketing and your advertising are also translated and localized into that country. Because just like having a comic in the United States, if it's never marketed, it's never promoted, you don't have a group of people who want to read it, then all that's going to happen is when you translate it, you'll have that same outcome in another language. So it's not clear when Global Comics is going to actually expand this program beyond AWA to other emerging and independent publishers. But as they do, and as you actually look to maybe expand your market into other countries, keep in mind that it's going to have to go beyond the translation of the actual book and into also the marketing and advertising and other promotions. So that's going to be it for me. The weekend has now officially started. I hope you all enjoy your Memorial Day weekend. We will see you next week. And until then, have fun with your comics.